The blood dripping from Delilah Sinclair's split lip matched the crimson sunset blazing over the rugged Colorado landscape as she stumbled down the dusty road leading into La Junta. Her left eye had swollen shut, her once beautiful face marred by the brutal handiwork of the man she'd made the mistake of marrying 3 years ago. This time, she wasn't going back, couldn't go back, even if it meant dying alone in this unfamiliar frontier town. La Junta, Colorado, 1874, a settlement perched on the Arkansas River where the Santa Fe Trail bent northward, where railroads were bringing change, and where Delilah prayed she might somehow disappear. Her threadbare dress hung from her thin frame, the small bundle of possessions clutched against her chest, containing everything she had managed to grab in her desperate flight. The townsfolk averted their eyes as she passed. A woman in her condition was either trouble or troubled, and no one wanted involvement either way. Delilah didn't blame them. At 23, she had become a walking testament to poor choices and broken promises. The sun had nearly vanished when her knees finally buckled, sending her collapsing onto the wooden boardwalk outside the town's general store. The world spun around her, hunger, exhaustion, and despair forming a potent mixture that pulled her consciousness away like the receding tide. As darkness closed in, she heard a deep voice and felt strong arms lifting her. "Miss, can you hear me?" Those were the last words she registered before blackness claimed her completely. Caleb O'Malley had just finished loading supplies into his wagon when he spotted the woman collapse. At 30 years old, he'd seen his share of suffering during his time as a cavalry soldier and later as a rancher, but something about her broken form stirred something fierce in him. He didn't hesitate to scoop her up, noting with concern how light she felt in his arms. Someone fetch Doc Wilkins. He called to the small crowd that had begun to gather. Now, Martha Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife, hurried forward. "Bring her inside, Mr. O'Malley. The doctor's out at the Thompson place delivering a baby." Inside the store, Caleb laid the unconscious woman on a narrow bench while Martha fetched water and clean cloths. "Lord have mercy," Martha whispered as she began cleaning the dried blood from the woman's face. "Someone's done this poor child a terrible wrong." Caleb's jaw tightened as he took in the extent of her injuries. The bruises weren't fresh, some yellowing at the edges, others still dark and angry. This hadn't been a single beating but a pattern of abuse. His hands clenched involuntarily at his sides. "I'll take her to my ranch," he said abruptly. "She needs care and a safe place to recover." Martha looked up sharply. "Mr. O'Malley, that wouldn't be proper, you being a bachelor and all." "Mrs. Wilkins can come stay as a chaperone," he countered. "My housekeeper's visiting her sister in Pueblo. I've got the room, and whoever did this might come looking for her in town." Martha hesitated, then nodded. "I'll send my boy to fetch Mrs. Wilkins when the doctor returns. What's your interest in this stranger, Mr. O'Malley?" Caleb couldn't have explained it if he tried. Something about the woman's battered face awoke protective instincts he'd thought long buried after losing his family during a Comanche raid years ago. "No interest beyond Christian charity, madam. No one deserves this." The woman stirred slightly, her unswollen eye fluttering open briefly. The flash of fear that crossed her face when she saw Caleb standing over her cut him to the quick. "You're safe," he said softly. "No one's going to hurt you here." She didn't respond, slipping back into unconsciousness. Martha finished cleaning her face as best she could. "She'll need time to heal," Martha said. "And not just her body." Caleb nodded grimly. "Time and safety, I can provide both." That evening, with Mrs. Wilkins following in her husband's buggy, Caleb drove his wagon slowly along the rutted road to his ranch 6 miles outside of town. The woman still nameless lay bundled in blankets in the wagon bed, sedated with the doctor's laudanum. Doc Wilkins had examined her thoroughly, cataloging injuries both old and new. 2 cracked ribs, a possible concussion, multiple contusions, and signs of long-term malnutrition. "Whoever did this is an animal," the doctor had said, his kind face hardened with anger. "She's lucky to be alive." The rocking O Ranch came into view just as the first stars appeared. It wasn't the largest spread in the Arkansas Valley, but it was profitable and well-maintained, the result of 7 years of Caleb's sweat and determination. The main house, built of sturdy pine and adobe, stood as a testament to his refusal to be driven away by the harsh land or the memories that sometimes haunted him. Mrs. Wilkins, a plump, gray-haired woman with a no-nonsense manner, took charge immediately upon arrival. "Put her in the guest room, Mr. O'Malley. I'll tend to her from here." Caleb carried the woman inside, struck again by how fragile she felt. In the lamplight, her features seemed younger. He guessed she couldn't be much more than 20. What circumstances had led her to this state? Who was hunting her? For he had no doubt someone would come looking. "I'll be nearby if you need anything," he told Mrs. Wilkins, reluctantly leaving the room. In the kitchen, he poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, turning his hat in his hands. The ranch had always been a solitary place for him by choice. After losing his parents and younger sister back in '64, he'd preferred keeping to himself, finding comfort in hard work and the predictable company of cattle and horses. But tonight his home felt different with the presence of the injured woman. A soft knock on the doorframe roused him from his thoughts. "She's awake," Mrs. Wilkins said, "and frightened half to death. She's asking where she is and who's brought her here." Caleb stood. "Did she give her name?" "Says she's Delilah Sinclair, from Missouri originally." "Did she say what happened to her?" Mrs. Wilkins's mouth tightened. "Didn't have to. Wears a wedding band and flinches at sudden movements. You know what that means as well as I do." Caleb nodded grimly. "May I speak with her, briefly?" "She needs rest more than conversation." The guest room was small but comfortable, illuminated by a single oil lamp that cast soft shadows across the walls. Delilah Sinclair was sitting up against the pillows, her right eye a striking shade of green, watching him warily as he entered. Her left eye remained swollen shut, and in the lamplight the bruising on her face appeared even more stark against her pale skin. "Madam," Caleb said, keeping his distance and his voice gentle, "I'm Caleb O'Malley. This is my ranch. You're safe here." She studied him, suspicion evident in her gaze. "Why am I here? Why did you bring me? You collapsed in town. You needed help." "I don't have money to pay you. I'm not asking for payment." Her fingers twisted the thin blanket. "Everyone wants something, Mr. O'Malley." The bitter knowledge in her voice made his heart ache. "All I want is for you to heal, Miss Sinclair. Mrs. Wilkins will stay here as your companion. When you're well enough, we'll help you get wherever you want to go." "I'm not a miss." "I'm married," she said, though he noted she didn't sound happy about it. "Is your husband looking for you?" he asked carefully. Fear flickered across her face before she mastered it. "Yes, and when he finds me, he'll kill me for running. That's not exaggeration, Mr. O'Malley. He's promised it many times." Caleb felt cold anger settle in his chest. "He won't find you here, and if he does, he'll have to go through me first." A ghost of a smile touched her bruised lips. "You don't even know me. I know enough." He moved toward the door. "Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger." "Mr. O'Malley." Her voice stopped him. "Thank you for your kindness, but please understand it won't matter in the end. Edward always finds me." The resignation in her voice haunted Caleb long after he left the room. As he checked the doors and windows before turning in for the night, he made a silent vow that this time would be different. Edward Sinclair might come looking, but he wouldn't be taking his wife back, not while Caleb drew breath. Dawn arrived with pale fingers of light stretching across the Colorado plains. Caleb had been up for hours, tending to the ranch chores with a watchfulness born of unease. Mrs. Wilkins found him in the barn as she came to fetch eggs from the henhouse. "She's still sleeping," the older woman reported. "Poor thing was exhausted beyond measure." "How bad are her injuries, truly?" Caleb asked, forking hay into a stall. "Bad enough, but she'll heal physically. It's the other wounds I worry about." Mrs. Wilkins's normally cheerful face was solemn. "She woke crying in the night, thought she was back with him." Caleb set the pitchfork aside. "Did she say anything about him? Where he might be?" "Said he's a gambler and a drunk. They've been moving west for the past year, staying in towns only until his temper or his debts force them to leave. Last place was Dodge City. She ran when he passed out after a 3-day bender. Dodge City's a fair distance. That gives us some time." Mrs. Wilkins eyed him curiously. "Time for what exactly?" "Time for her to decide what she wants to do next," Caleb replied, though even as he spoke, plans were forming in his mind. Inside the house, he found Delilah awake and seated at the kitchen table. Someone, Mrs. Wilkins, presumably had helped her change into a simple cotton dress that hung loosely on her frame. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, had been combed and braided, revealing more bruising along her jawline that had previously been hidden. "Good morning, Mrs. Sinclair," he said, keeping his voice even despite the anger that flared at the sight of her injuries. "How are you feeling?" "Better than yesterday," she replied cautiously. "Thank you for the clothes and the bed. You're welcome to both for as long as you need." He poured himself coffee, noting that she tensed when he moved near her. "I won't hurt you, Mrs. Sinclair." "Delilah," she said softly. "If I'm to stay here even briefly, please call me Delilah." "Delilah, then." He sat across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I need to ask you some difficult questions if you feel up to answering." Her gaze dropped to the table. "About Edward?" "Yes. The more I know, the better I can help you." She was silent for so long that Caleb thought she might refuse. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I met Edward when I was 19. My parents had died of fever and I was working as a seamstress in St. Louis. He was charming, well-dressed, promised me the world." A bitter smile touched her lips. "The beating started on our wedding night. He said I disappointed him somehow. It became a pattern. He'd gamble, lose, drink, and then use me to vent his frustrations." Caleb's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "Did you try to leave before?" She nodded. "Twice. The first time he found me at my aunt's home, beat her too just to teach me a lesson. The second time—" She trailed off, touching her ribs unconsciously. "I didn't try again until now. Does he have friends in this area, anyone who might shelter him?" "Edward doesn't have friends, only people he hasn't cheated yet." She finally looked up at him. "Why are you helping me, truly?" Caleb considered his answer carefully. "My sister was 16 when she died. Raiders took her during an attack on our homestead. I couldn't save her then. Perhaps I'm trying to make up for that now." "I'm sorry about your sister," Delilah said with genuine sympathy. "But I'm not her, Mr. O'Malley. I'm not worth saving. Edward has made sure of that." "Caleb," he corrected gently. "And everyone's worth saving, Delilah." The days that followed fell into an uneasy rhythm. Delilah remained inside, gradually regaining her strength while Mrs. Wilkins maintained a motherly presence. Caleb continued the ranch work with his 2 hired hands, Tom Jenkins and Miguel Herrera, both veterans like himself who asked no questions about the woman recovering in the main house. On the 5th day, Caleb returned from checking fence lines to find Delilah sitting on the front porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the warm afternoon. The swelling in her face had subsided considerably, revealing delicate features that hinted at the beauty that had been temporarily obscured by violence. "Dr. Wilkins came by," she said as he approached. "He says I'm healing well." Caleb nodded, removing his hat. "That's good news." "He also says I should start moving around more. I'd like to make myself useful if you'll allow it." "You don't need to earn your keep, Delilah." A flash of something pride perhaps crossed her face. "I've never been comfortable with charity, Caleb, even now." He studied her for a moment, recognizing the dignity beneath her fragility. "Can you cook?" "Reasonably well. My housekeeper won't be back for another 2 weeks. Having someone prepare proper meals would be helpful, but only if you're truly feeling up to it." Relief visibly washed over her. "I am. Thank you." That evening, Delilah served a simple but well-prepared meal of beef stew and biscuits. Mrs. Wilkins, Caleb, and the ranch hands ate together at the large kitchen table, a departure from the usual practice of the hands eating in their bunkhouse. Caleb had invited them specifically to provide Delilah with more friendly faces, more proof that not all men behaved like her husband. "This is mighty fine cooking, Mrs. Sinclair," Tom said appreciatively, reaching for another biscuit. "Thank you," Delilah replied, the faintest blush coloring her cheeks. Miguel nodded in agreement. "Reminds me of my mother's cooking. She always said good food needs love as an ingredient." Caleb watched as Delilah tentatively joined the conversation, offering small smiles at Miguel's stories about his large family in New Mexico. It was the most he'd seen her relax since her arrival, and something warm unfurled in his chest at the sight. After dinner, while Mrs. Wilkins helped Delilah clear the dishes, Miguel approached Caleb privately. "Boss, riders came through the south pasture today," he said quietly. "2 men asking questions at the Patterson place about a woman matching Mrs. Sinclair's description." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Edward Sinclair?" "Don't know. They didn't give names, but Patterson said one was well-dressed, the other rough-looking. Said they were looking for a runaway wife." "What did Patterson tell them?" "That he hadn't seen anyone like that, but they're making the rounds of the outlying ranches. Won't be long before they head this way." Caleb nodded grimly. "Double the night watch, and Miguel, if they come here, I want to know before they reach the house." "She, patron," Miguel hesitated. "If it's her husband, you know the law will be on his side. A man has rights over his wife." "Some rights aren't worth the paper they're written on," Caleb replied, his voice hard. "No man has the right to do what he did to her." After Miguel left, Caleb stood on the porch, watching darkness settle over the land. Stars emerged one by one in the vast Colorado sky while crickets began their nightly chorus. The peaceful scene belied the tension coiling inside him at the thought of Edward Sinclair's approach. The screen door creaked behind him. Delilah stepped out, wrapped in the shawl again. "They've found me, haven't they?" she asked quietly. Caleb turned, surprised. "You overheard?" "I've become good at listening for danger." Her face was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. "I should leave before I bring trouble to your door, and go where? It doesn't matter. I can't stay here and put you and the others at risk." "Delilah," Caleb said gently, "running with no destination is no solution." "What would you have me do?" A note of desperation entered her voice. "I have no money, no family, no protection." "You have me," he said simply. She stared at him, confusion evident in her gaze. "You barely know me. I know enough." He took a careful step toward her. "I have a proposition for you." "Mr. O'Malley, hear me out," he insisted. "Your husband is searching for his wife, Delilah Sinclair." "But what if she didn't exist anymore?" Her brow furrowed. "I don't understand." "Marry me," he said, the words emerging before he'd fully formed the thought. "In name only. A marriage of convenience that would make you legally my wife, not his. He'd have no claim on you then." Delilah's mouth opened in shock. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more. You'd have my protection, my name, and a home for as long as you wish. When you feel safe and ready to move on, we could quietly arrange an annulment. Why would you do this for a stranger? Caleb hesitated, uncertain himself of the full answer. Because it's the right thing to do, and because no one deserves to live in fear. Delilah turned away, gazing out at the darkened landscape. And if he kills you for it? Edward is not a rational man, Caleb. He sees me as his property. I can handle Edward Sinclair. She was quiet for a long moment. You would truly marry me knowing what you'd be taking on. I would. When she turned back to him, tears shimmered in her eyes. Then I accept your proposition, Mr. O'Malley, though I pray you won't regret it. The following morning, Caleb rode into La Junta with a purpose that brooked no delay. His first stop was the church, where he spoke privately with Reverend Thomas about performing a marriage ceremony as soon as possible. This is very sudden, Mr. O'Malley, the Reverend said, studying Caleb's face with concern. Are you certain about this course of action? I am, Caleb replied firmly. Mrs. Sinclair needs protection that only my name can provide. The Reverend's eyebrows rose. You're aware that she's already married. Her husband is abusive and dangerous. She fled for her life. I sympathize with her plight, truly I do, but bigamy is still a sin and a crime. Caleb leaned forward. Her marriage could be dissolved on grounds of cruelty, but that takes time she doesn't have. Her husband is searching for her now. Once he's found, we can handle the legal matters properly. Reverend Thomas sighed. What you're proposing skirts the edge of what's right, Caleb. And what's right about sending a battered woman back to her tormentor? Would God approve of that? The Reverend was silent for a long moment. I'll perform the ceremony tomorrow at noon. But you must promise to legitimize this situation legally as soon as possible. You have my word. From the church, Caleb went to the general store, where he purchased a simple gold band. His final stop was at the sheriff's office, where he found Sheriff Wilson drinking coffee and reviewing wanted posters. Morning, Caleb, the sheriff greeted him. What brings you to town? Information, Caleb replied, taking a seat. I'm told 2 men are searching the area for a runaway wife. Have they been through town? Wilson's expression turned guarded. They have. One calls himself Edward Sinclair, claims his wife is mentally unstable and ran off during a bout of hysteria, wanted me to help find her. And did you? Told him I hadn't seen anyone matching her description. Wilson eyed Caleb shrewdly, but I'm guessing you have. She collapsed outside the general store 5 days ago. Her face was so bruised and swollen she was barely recognizable as a woman. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Sinclair didn't mention that part. He wouldn't. Is she at your place? Caleb nodded. And I intend to marry her tomorrow to protect her from him. I'd appreciate it if you'd attend as a witness. Wilson let out a low whistle. That's a bold move even for you. You know he could claim you kidnapped her. Let him try. I want everything done legally and properly with witnesses. The sheriff studied him. You sure about this, Caleb? Taking another man's wife, even an abused one, could get you killed. Some things are worth the risk. Wilson nodded slowly. Noon tomorrow at the church. Yes, I'll be there. The sheriff paused. Sinclair's staying at the hotel with his companion, a rough character named Vance. I'll try to keep them occupied, but they're bound to hear about the wedding. I'm counting on it, Caleb said grimly. When Caleb returned to the ranch, he found Delilah in the kitchen kneading bread dough, her movements methodical and focused. She looked up as he entered, flour dusting her cheeks and hands. It's arranged, he said. Tomorrow at noon. She nodded, her expression unreadable. So quickly. Time isn't on our side. He sat at the table. Are you having second thoughts? Delilah wiped her hands on her apron. Not second thoughts, just, it's difficult to believe anyone would go to such lengths for me. You're worth it, Delilah. She looked away. Edward will be furious. Let him be. After tomorrow, you'll be Delilah O'Malley, not Sinclair. A small, sad smile touched her lips. A new name doesn't erase the past, Caleb. No, he agreed softly, but it can be the start of a new future. That night, after Mrs. Wilkins had retired to her room and the house had grown quiet, Caleb sat on the porch cleaning his revolver by lamplight. The familiar task allowed his mind to wander, contemplating the strange turn his life had taken in less than a week. Tomorrow, he would have a wife in name only, but still a profound change for a man who'd spent years in self-imposed solitude. The screen door opened, and Delilah stepped out, wrapped in a quilt against the night chill. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, taking a seat in the rocking chair near him. "Just making preparations." He set the gun aside. "What about you?" "Dreams," she said simply. "Not good ones." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of her rocking chair and the distant howl of a coyote. "Tell me about your life before," she finally said. "Before you came to Colorado." Caleb leaned back, memories surfacing like stones in a river. "Born in Pennsylvania. My father was a blacksmith who caught gold fever in '49. Moved us to California when I was 5, but the gold was mostly gone by then. We ended up farming outside Sacramento until the raids in '64. "Your sister," Delilah said softly. He nodded. "After losing my family, I joined the cavalry, served for 8 years, mostly fighting Indians who were just trying to protect their own land. Never sat right with me. When my enlistment ended, I came east again, looking for somewhere to start fresh. And you found this place. It was barely more than a shack and overgrazed pasture when I bought it. Previous owner had run it into the ground, took everything I had to build it up." Delilah studied him in the dim light. "You've created something beautiful here." "It's a work in progress," he hesitated. "What about you?" "Before Edward," she sighed, her fingers tracing patterns on the quilt. "Not much to tell, ordinary childhood in Missouri. Father was a shopkeeper, mother taught school before she married. They were good people who loved each other. I thought all marriages were like theirs." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I was naive." "You were young," Caleb corrected. "There's no shame in expecting decency." "Perhaps." She rocked slowly. "After they died of typhoid, I had few options. Edward seemed like salvation at the time. And now I know better than to look for salvation in others." She met his gaze directly. "Including you, Caleb," he nodded, respecting her candor. "Fair enough. I'm not offering salvation, just a chance." "A chance," she repeated thoughtfully. "I haven't had one of those in a very long time." Morning arrived with unusual activity at the Rocking O Ranch. Mrs. Wilkins had taken charge of preparing Delilah for the wedding, shooing Caleb from the house after breakfast with instructions to make himself scarce until it was time to leave for town. In the barn, Caleb dressed in his best suit, seldom worn and slightly outdated with Miguel's help. "You clean up good, patron," Miguel said, helping him with his string tie. "Almost look like a proper bridegroom." "This isn't a real marriage," Caleb reminded him, though the words felt hollow somehow. Miguel shrugged. "Maybe not in your mind, but the law will see it differently." "And so will her husband." "Ex-husband," Caleb corrected. "Not yet." Miguel's expression grew serious. "Be careful, my friend. Men like Sinclair don't surrender what they consider theirs without a fight." "I'm counting on it," Caleb replied grimly. At 11:30, the wagon was ready, decorated simply with ribbons Mrs. Wilkins had brought from town. Caleb waited at the front of the house, hat in hand, stomach knotted with a tension he hadn't expected to feel. When the door opened, he momentarily forgot to breathe. Delilah stood framed in the doorway, wearing a dress of pale blue that Mrs. Wilkins had altered to fit her slender frame. Her hair was arranged in soft curls around her face, which had healed enough that only faint yellowing bruises remained visible. A small bunch of wildflowers was clutched in her trembling hands. "You look beautiful," Caleb said, meaning it completely. A blush colored her cheeks. Mrs. Wilkins worked miracles. "It's not the dress," he replied softly. The ride to town was largely silent, each lost in their own thoughts about the step they were about to take. Mrs. Wilkins filled the silence with cheerful chatter about the weather and town gossip, either unaware of or deliberately ignoring the tension between her companions. La Junta's small wooden church stood on the eastern edge of town, its white steeple reaching toward the clear Colorado sky. As they approached, Caleb noted several horses tied at the hitching post, including Sheriff Wilson's distinctive dun gelding. "Looks like we have a few more witnesses than expected," he murmured to Delilah. Her hand gripped his arm tightly. "Is Edward no sign of him yet?" Caleb covered her hand with his. "Remember, after today, you're under my protection legally. Hold on to that." Inside, they found the sheriff, Doc Wilkins, Martha Peterson and her husband, and two of Caleb's neighboring ranchers waiting in the pews. Reverend Thomas stood at the altar, Bible in hand, his expression solemn. "Word travels fast," Caleb whispered to Wilson as they passed. "Figured you'd want respectable witnesses," the sheriff replied quietly. No chance of Sinclair claiming this was done in secret. The ceremony itself was brief and traditional. Delilah's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her vows, but her eyes remained steady on Caleb's face. When he slipped the gold band onto her finger, he was struck by how right it looked there. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Thomas concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Caleb hesitated, suddenly aware that they hadn't discussed this part. Delilah solved the dilemma by rising on tiptoe and pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered for his ears alone. The small congregation applauded, and Mrs. Wilkins dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Sheriff Wilson stepped forward first to congratulate them, followed by the others. "If Sinclair shows up now, he'll find himself facing a legally married couple," Wilson said quietly to Caleb during the handshaking. "Still, I'd recommend getting her home quickly." Caleb nodded, keeping Delilah close to his side as they thanked their witnesses and prepared to leave. They had nearly reached the door when it burst open, revealing two men, one in an expensive but trail-worn suit, the other large and rough, looking with a scar across his right cheek. "Well, isn't this a touching scene?" the well-dressed man drawled, his gaze fixing on Delilah with cold fury. "My devoted wife, remarrying without so much as a divorce." Delilah's fingers dug into Caleb's arm as she shrank against him. The terror in her posture told him all he needed to know about Edward Sinclair. "Your wife suffered an unfortunate accident," Caleb said evenly. "Delilah O'Malley is my lawfully wedded wife now." Edward's face reddened. "This is absurd. She's already married to me. This ceremony is a farce." Sheriff Wilson stepped forward. "The marriage has been properly witnessed and recorded, Mr. Sinclair. If you have a legal objection, you can take it up with the territorial court in Denver." "Oh, I'll do better than that," Edward snarled, turning to Delilah. "Come here, wife. Now." When she didn't move, his companion Vance presumably took a threatening step forward. Instantly, several men moved to block him, including Doc Wilkins and the ranchers. "Think carefully about your next move," Caleb warned softly. "You're outnumbered." Edward's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over, O'Malley. Not by a long shot." He looked at Delilah again. "And you'll regret this betrayal." "The only regret she has," Caleb replied, "is ever having met you. For a moment, it seemed Edward might lunge at them, but Vance placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Not here," he muttered. "Too many witnesses." With a final venomous glance, Edward turned and stormed out, Vance following close behind. The silence in the church was deafening until Reverend Thomas cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should conclude the festivities. Mrs. O'Malley looks in need of rest." Delilah was indeed pale, trembling visibly now that the confrontation had ended. Caleb wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. "Let's get you home," he murmured. The return journey to the ranch was tense, with Caleb scanning the landscape constantly for signs of pursuit. Miguel and Tom had ridden ahead as an escort, rifles across their saddles. "He'll come for me," Delilah said quietly as the ranch came into view. "You know that, don't you?" Caleb nodded grimly. "I'm counting on it. Better to end this now than live looking over our shoulders." "Our shoulders," she repeated, a note of wonder in her voice. "It's strange to think I'm not alone anymore." "You're not," he confirmed, helping her down from the wagon. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley." That evening, after a small celebration dinner prepared by Mrs. Wilkins, Caleb showed Delilah to the master bedroom. "You'll sleep here," he said. "I've moved my things to the small room down the hall." Delilah glanced around the spacious room with its handsome oak furniture and quilted bed. "This is your room. I can't take it. You're my wife now. The master bedroom is yours." She turned to face him, uncertainty in her eyes. "Caleb, I want you to know that I'm grateful. More than I can express, but I don't expect. That is, I know this isn't a real marriage." Understanding her meaning, he smiled gently. "I made a promise that this was in name only, Delilah. I intend to honor that." Relief and something like disappointment flickered across her face. "Thank you." He hesitated at the door. "Try to rest. Miguel and Tom will be keeping watch tonight." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "What happens now? With Edward, I mean." "Now we wait," Caleb replied honestly, "and we prepare." The following days established a new rhythm at the ranch. Delilah gradually took over household duties from Mrs. Wilkins, who returned to town after a week. Satisfied that propriety was being maintained despite the unusual circumstances of the marriage, Caleb found himself looking forward to returning to the house each evening, where the smell of cooking and the warm light in the windows created a sense of home he hadn't felt in years. Delilah proved to be not only an excellent cook, but also a thoughtful companion, her natural intelligence emerging as she regained her confidence. They settled into a comfortable routine of shared meals and evening conversations on the porch. Caleb told her stories of his cavalry days and the early struggles of establishing the ranch. Delilah, in turn, shared memories of her childhood in Missouri and her dreams of someday opening a small dressmaking shop. "You still could," Caleb said one evening as they watched the sunset. "There's no dressmaker in La Junta. Martha Peterson sells fabric but has to order in finished garments from Denver." Delilah looked surprised. "You think there would be enough business? The town's growing. Railroad brings new people through every day. And you've done wonders repairing and altering clothes around here." He gestured to his own shirt, which she had skillfully mended after it caught on a fence post. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, something he was seeing more frequently these days. "Perhaps someday. When this is all over." The unspoken question hung between them. What exactly would be over? The threat from Edward, or their marriage of convenience? 2 weeks after the wedding, Sheriff Wilson rode out to the ranch with news. "Sinclair and Vance have left town," he reported as Delilah served coffee in the kitchen. "Took the eastbound train yesterday." Caleb frowned. "That seems too easy." "Agreed," Wilson said grimly. Before leaving, Sinclair filed a formal complaint alleging kidnapping and bigamy. He's gone to Denver to petition the territorial court. Delilah's hands shook as she set down the coffee pot. What does that mean? It means he's trying legal channels first, Caleb said. Smart move. If he can get the marriage invalidated, you'd legally still be his wife. Can he do that? Alarm filled her voice. The sheriff sighed. Possibly. Depends on the judge. Bigamy is a serious charge and without proof of his abuse. My body was proof, Delilah said bitterly. Every bruise, every broken bone. We need to document your injuries, Caleb decided. Doc Wilkins examined you when you first arrived. His testimony, combined with statements from those who saw your condition. It might not be enough, Wilson warned. The law still favors husbands in these matters. Then we'll find another way. Caleb's tone brooked no argument. I made a promise to protect her. I intend to keep it. After the sheriff left, Delilah stood at the kitchen window, arms wrapped tightly around herself. He's never going to stop, is he? Caleb moved to stand beside her. Everyone stops eventually, Delilah. She turned to face him, eyes searching his. What aren't you saying? Nothing you need to worry about. I'm not fragile, Caleb, not anymore. Her chin lifted with newfound determination. If you're planning something, I deserve to know. He studied her, noting the strength that had gradually replaced the fear in her bearing. Sinclair's a gambler, right? Men like that follow patterns. He'll try the legal route first, but when that fails he'll come back, probably with Vance, and when he does. You'll be waiting, she finished softly. We'll be waiting, he corrected. This is your fight too. That night, unable to sleep, Caleb stood at his bedroom window gazing at the starlit landscape. The door creaked behind him and he turned to find Delilah in the doorway, a shawl wrapped over her nightgown. I couldn't sleep, she explained, hesitating at the threshold. Neither could I. He gestured for her to enter. She came in, perching tentatively on the edge of his bed. I've been thinking about what happens after. After Edward is no longer a threat. She looked down at her hands. Our arrangement was temporary. You spoke of an annulment eventually. That was the agreement, he acknowledged, though the thought suddenly displeased him. And if I didn't want an annulment? Her voice was barely audible. Caleb went very still. What are you saying, Delilah? She met his gaze, vulnerability and courage mingled in her expression. I'm saying that these weeks with you have shown me what a marriage should be. Respect, kindness, partnership. She took a shaky breath. I'm saying that I'm developing feelings for you, Caleb O'Malley, real ones. He crossed the room slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. When she remained in place, he knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I never expected you, he said honestly. Never thought I wanted or needed anyone in my life, but now I can't imagine this ranch or my life without you in it. Tears filled her eyes. Even with all my baggage, all my scars, especially with them, they're part of what makes you who you are. He reached up to gently cup her cheek. I'm falling in love with you, Delilah, and that terrifies me more than Edward Sinclair ever could. A tear slipped down her cheek as she leaned into his touch. It terrifies me too. We don't have to decide anything now, he assured her. Let's deal with Sinclair first. Then we'll have all the time in the world to figure out what comes next. She nodded, then surprised him by leaning forward to press a soft, hesitant kiss to his lips. Unlike the chaste peck at their wedding, this was a real kiss, gentle but unmistakably meaningful. That's my decision, she whispered as she pulled back. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you, not as a temporary arrangement, but as your true wife. Caleb felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the solitude he'd wrapped around himself for protection all these years. Then that's what we'll do. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the territorial court in Denver, summoning them both to a hearing regarding Edward's petition. The date was set for 2 weeks hence. We should go to Denver early, Caleb decided as they discussed the matter over dinner. Give us time to meet with a lawyer, prepare our case. Delilah nodded, though anxiety shadowed her face. I've never been to Denver. It's grown considerably in recent years. You might find inspiration there for your dressmaking ambitions. Her smile was distracted. Perhaps. What is it? He asked, noting her unease. I can't help feeling that Edward isn't really placing his hopes in the court. She set down her fork. He's not a patient man, Caleb. This legal process could take months. You think it's a diversion. I think it's a way to get us away from the ranch. Away from your men and your guns. She met his gaze directly. Away from where you have the advantage. Caleb considered this, impressed by her insight. You could be right. So what do we do? Spring the trap instead of walking into it. A plan was already forming in his mind. We'll let it be known we're traveling to Denver, but take a different route than expected. And if he's watching, we'll be watching for him too. The following day, Caleb rode into La Junta to make arrangements. He booked passage on the Denver-bound train, made a show of discussing the journey with several townspeople, then met privately with Sheriff Wilson. I need a favor, he explained after outlining his suspicions. Make it known that we'll be taking the Thursday morning train. But we'll actually leave by wagon on Wednesday, taking the North Trail. Wilson frowned. That's the longer route. Exactly, and less traveled. If Sinclair plans an ambush, he'll set it along the main road or at the station. And you want me to follow at a distance? Caleb nodded. Just in case my instincts are wrong. They rarely are, Wilson acknowledged. But this is a risky game you're playing, Caleb. Less risky than waiting for him to make a move when we're not prepared. Back at the ranch, Caleb found Delilah in the garden, harvesting late summer vegetables. The sight of her hair tied back with a ribbon, sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed with effort stirred something profound in his chest. In just a few weeks, she had transformed from a broken, fearful woman into someone strong and determined. Someone he couldn't imagine living without. Everything's arranged, he reported, taking the basket from her to carry inside. We leave Wednesday morning, and the sheriff will follow at a distance. He set the basket on the kitchen table. Are you sure about this, Delilah? It's not too late to change our plan. She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. I've spent 3 years running and hiding from Edward. I won't spend another day living in fear of him. Caleb stepped closer, drawn by the fire in her eyes. Have I told you how remarkable you are? A smile tugged at her lips. Not today. He cupped her face gently, still mindful of the fading bruises. You're the bravest person I've ever known. She leaned into his touch. Only because you gave me something worth being brave for. The kiss that followed was deeper than their previous ones, carrying the weight of emotions neither had fully expressed. When they finally parted, both were breathless. When this is over, Caleb said softly, I want to start our marriage properly. Not out of necessity or protection, but because it's what we both want. Delilah's eyes shimmered with tears and hope. I want that too. Wednesday dawned clear and cool, a perfect Colorado autumn day. They left the ranch at first light, the wagon loaded with supplies and Caleb's rifle within easy reach. Miguel and Tom would follow later, taking a parallel route as additional security. The North Trail wound through rolling hills dotted with pine and scrub oak, offering plenty of cover but also numerous places for an ambush. Caleb drove alertly, eyes constantly scanning the terrain while Delilah sat beside him, a small derringer, his gift to her, hidden in her pocket. By mid-morning, they had covered nearly 15 miles without incident. Caleb began to wonder if they had misjudged Sinclair's intentions. Maybe he really is waiting in Denver with lawyers, Delilah said, voicing his thoughts. Maybe, Caleb agreed, though something kept his senses on edge. They stopped to rest the horses near a small creek, the wagon positioned defensively against a rock outcropping. As Delilah prepared a simple lunch from their provisions, Caleb climbed the rocks to survey the trail ahead. The first shot caught him by surprise, kicking up dirt near his feet. The second came closer, forcing him to dive for cover. "Delilah, get down," he shouted, drawing his revolver as he scrambled back toward the wagon. Two more shots rang out from the tree line across the creek, followed by the thunder of approaching hooves. Caleb reached the wagon just as Delilah pulled the rifle from its scabbard, her face pale but determined. "Stay behind the wagon," he instructed, taking the rifle from her. "How many can you see?" "3 riders," she replied, the derringer now in her hand. "Edward and Vance for certain." "I don't recognize the third." Caleb peered around the wagon's edge, confirming her count. Edward and his companions had stopped at the tree line, apparently assessing the situation. "O'Malley," Edward's voice carried across the distance. "Send out my wife and you might live through this." "She's not your wife anymore, Sinclair," Caleb called back, positioning himself at the corner of the wagon. "A pretend marriage doesn't change the law." Delilah moved to Caleb's side. "Let me talk to him." "Absolutely not," Caleb growled. "He'll shoot you where you stand." "No, he won't." "He wants me alive." Her eyes were steady. "Let me distract him while you get a better position." Before he could argue further, she stepped partly into view, keeping the wagon between her and the gunmen. "Edward," she called. "This has gone far enough." "Delilah." Edward's voice held false warmth. "Come to your senses, have you? Come over here now and I'll forgive this foolishness." "I'm not coming back to you," she replied clearly. "Ever. I'm legally married to Caleb now." "A marriage based on lies," Edward snarled, his veneer of civility cracking. "You're my property, Delilah. Mine to do with as I please." While Edward was focused on Delilah, Caleb slipped around the far side of the wagon, using the rocks for cover as he worked his way to a better vantage point. "I was never your property," Delilah continued, her voice stronger than Caleb had ever heard it. "I was a frightened girl you manipulated and abused, but I'm not afraid anymore." "You should be," Edward growled. He turned to his companions. "Get her. Kill O'Malley if he interferes." Vance and the third man spurred their horses forward, crossing the creek with guns drawn. From his position in the rocks, Caleb took careful aim and fired. The third man cried out, clutching his arm as he tumbled from his horse. Vance wheeled around, searching for the source of the shot. Delilah ducked back behind the wagon as Edward fired wildly in her direction. Caleb dropped Vance with his second shot, the big man falling heavily to the ground with a bullet in his shoulder. Edward, seeing his advantage disappearing, spurred his horse directly toward the wagon, firing as he rode. Caleb scrambled down from the rocks, desperate to reach Delilah before Edward did. A shot rang out from behind the wagon. Then another. Edward's horse reared, throwing him to the ground. When Caleb rounded the wagon, he found Delilah standing with the smoking derringer in her steady hand. "You missed," he said, noting that Edward was scrambling to his feet, apparently unharmed. "I wasn't aiming for him," she replied calmly. "I was stopping his horse." Edward had lost his gun in the fall and now stood exposed in the open ground between the creek and the wagon. Caleb leveled his rifle at him. "It's over, Sinclair," he called. "Sheriff Wilson and my ranch hands will be here any minute. You've lost." Rage contorted Edward's handsome features. "She belongs to me. Everything she is, I made her." "You tried to break her," Caleb corrected. "But she was stronger than you knew." Edward's eyes darted between them, calculating. Then, with a roar of fury, he charged toward them, pulling a knife from his boot as he ran. Caleb aimed but hesitated to fire, killing an unarmed man, even one as despicable as Sinclair, wasn't something he could do easily. The hesitation nearly cost him everything. Edward closed the distance with surprising speed, the knife slashing toward Caleb's throat. He barely managed to deflect the blow with his rifle, sending the weapon spinning from his hands. They grappled in the dust, Edward fighting with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. The knife flashed again, slicing through Caleb's shirt and drawing blood along his ribs. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Caleb landed a solid punch to Edward's jaw, momentarily stunning him. "Caleb!" Delilah's voice cut through his concentration. She stood a few feet away, his fallen revolver in her hands. "Move!" He rolled away from Edward just as Delilah fired. The bullet struck Edward in the thigh, collapsing him with a howl of pain. Caleb quickly disarmed him, tossing the knife well out of reach. "It's finished, Sinclair." Edward glared up at them, blood soaking his expensive trousers. "You think this changes anything? She'll always be damaged goods." "My leftovers." Delilah stepped forward, the revolver still trained on her former tormentor. "You're wrong, Edward. I'm not what you made me. I'm what I've made myself in spite of you." She looked at Caleb, her eyes clear and certain. "And I've found someone who sees that." The sound of approaching riders heralded the arrival of Sheriff Wilson and Miguel. Within minutes, Edward and his companions were disarmed and bound, their wounds being tended to with minimal sympathy. "You're lucky to be alive, Sinclair," Wilson observed as he examined the leg wound. "Mrs. O'Malley could have aimed higher." "I'll press charges," Edward snarled. "Attempted murder, bigamy. She's still legally my wife." "Actually," Wilson said, producing a folded document from his pocket, "I took the liberty of telegraphing the territorial judge after our conversation, Caleb." Given the circumstances and evidence of abuse, he granted an emergency dissolution of the Sinclair marriage, effective immediately. He handed the paper to Caleb. "Your marriage to Mrs. O'Malley is now the only valid one." Delilah's eyes widened in disbelief. "Is that possible?" "Irregular, but legal," Wilson confirmed. "The judge was particularly moved by Dr. Wilkins's report on your condition when you arrived in La Junta. He's also charging Mr. Sinclair here with assault and attempted murder based on today's events." Edward's face contorted with rage. "This isn't justice." "She's not yours," Caleb interrupted firmly. "She never really was." That evening, after returning to the ranch and having Caleb's wound properly treated, they sat together on the porch swing, watching as the last light faded from the western sky. Delilah rested her head against Caleb's shoulder, her hand finding his. "Doesn't feel real," she murmured. "That he's truly gone from my life." "He is," Caleb assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "Wilson will see him sent to prison for a good long while. And we're really legally married." There was wonder in her voice. "According to the territorial judge, yes." He turned to face her. "But I meant what I said before. When you're ready, we can have a proper wedding. One that's about us, not about protection or escape." Delilah studied his face in the gathering dusk. "And if I think we've already had our proper wedding? If I believe that a marriage born of kindness and protection is the truest kind there could be," Caleb smiled, his heart fuller than he'd ever thought possible. "Then, Mrs. O'Malley, I would say you have uncommon wisdom." "I have something better than wisdom," she replied softly, leaning up to kiss him. "I have love." 1 year later, the Rocking O Ranch had prospered beyond Caleb's expectations. The cattle herd had grown, the house had been expanded with a new wing, and the garden that Delilah had established produced vegetables enough to supply not only their table but also to sell in town. Delilah herself had flourished even more remarkably. The dress shop she had opened in La Junta 6 months earlier, initially just a small room attached to the general store, had quickly gained a reputation for fine workmanship and elegant designs. inspired by the fashion plates she ordered from Denver and St. Louis. More importantly, the shadows that had once haunted her eyes had faded. The woman who now moved confidently about their home bore little resemblance to the broken creature who had collapsed on La Junta's boardwalk a year ago. Her laughter came easily, her opinions were expressed without fear, and her affection for Caleb grew more evident with each passing day. Edward Sinclair had been sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison for attempted murder, effectively removing his shadow from their lives. Vance had received a lesser sentence, while the third man, a local tough hired for the occasion, had turned state's evidence against the others in exchange for leniency. On the anniversary of their wedding, Caleb surprised Delilah with a special dinner at home, sending the ranch hands into town for the evening to give them privacy. "What's the occasion?" she asked as she entered the dining room to find the table set with their best dishes, wildflowers arranged in a vase at the center. "Don't tell me you've forgotten our anniversary," he teased, pulling out her chair. Her smile was radiant. "Of course not. But I thought we might celebrate in town this weekend." "We still can," he assured her, taking his own seat. "But tonight I wanted you all to myself." They enjoyed a leisurely meal of venison steak, fresh vegetables from their garden, and apple pie that Delilah had baked that morning. Throughout dinner, Caleb seemed unusually contemplative, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You're staring," she finally said, setting down her fork. "Do I have pie on my face?" "No," he replied with a smile. "I'm just thinking about how much has changed in a year." "How much you've changed me." She reached across the table to take his hand. "We've changed each other." "That we have." He squeezed her fingers gently. "There's something I want to ask you, Delilah. You can ask me anything." He took a deep breath. "When we married, it was out of necessity. Neither of us had time to consider what we really wanted." He stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. "So I'm asking you now, with no threat hanging over us, Delilah O'Malley, will you stay married to me? Not because you need my name or my protection, but because you want to build a life with me." Tears filled her eyes as she cupped his face in her hands. "Caleb O'Malley, I've been truly married to you in my heart since long before Edward was out of our lives. My answer is yes today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Then accept this as a symbol of our real beginning." With trembling fingers, she allowed him to slide it onto her finger beside the simple gold band she already wore. "It's beautiful, like its wearer." He rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. "I love you, Delilah, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she whispered against his lips. "My protector, my partner, my heart." 5 years later, the Rocking O had become one of the most prosperous ranches in southeastern Colorado. The house had been expanded again to accommodate their growing family, 3-year-old twins, James and Sarah, and 6-month-old Michael. Delilah's dress shop had grown into a proper store on La Junta's Main Street, employing 3 seamstresses and attracting customers from as far away as Pueblo. She divided her time between the ranch and the shop, finding fulfillment in both her roles as mother and businesswoman. Caleb had been elected to the town council the previous year, his reputation for fairness and integrity making him a natural choice as the region transitioned from frontier outpost to established community. The scars from Edward's knife had faded to a thin white line along his ribs, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything before it had truly begun. On a warm spring evening, they sat together on the porch swing that had become their favorite spot for quiet conversations after the children were asleep. Delilah rested against Caleb's chest, his arm wrapped comfortably around her shoulders. "I had a letter from Martha today," she said, referring to her friend in town. "She says there's talk of Edward being considered for early release next year. Good behavior, apparently." Caleb's arm tightened slightly around her. "Does that worry you?" She considered the question honestly. "It would have once, but not anymore." She turned to look up at him. "I'm not afraid of Edward Sinclair. I haven't been for a very long time." "No," Caleb agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're not afraid of anything these days, Mrs. O'Malley." She smiled at that. "I wouldn't go that far. I'm terrified James is going to break his neck the way he climbs everything in sight. And I worry about your mother's visit next month. You know she thinks I don't feed you properly." Caleb laughed. "My mother thinks no one can feed me properly except her." "True enough." Delilah settled back against him, listening to the familiar sounds of the Colorado night crickets chirping, the distant lowing of cattle, the creaking of the swing as they rocked gently. "Do you ever think about that day? The day I arrived in La Junta?" "Often," he admitted. "I remember seeing you collapse and thinking someone had hurt you beyond repair." "I thought so too," she said softly. "I had no hope left, Caleb, not a shred. I was simply running because I couldn't bear to die under Edward's fists." He stroked her hair gently. "And look at you now." "Look at us now," she corrected, lacing her fingers through his. "Sometimes I think about the woman I was then, how beaten down, how lost. And I wish I could tell her that one day she'd have this. A real home, children, work that brings her pride, a husband who sees her, truly sees her." "She found her way to all of it," Caleb murmured, "because underneath all that pain was a woman of extraordinary strength." Delilah shook her head. "Not at first. At first I just borrowed your strength. You gave me your name, a safe place, and the chance to discover who I could be without fear." "And who are you, Delilah O'Malley?" she smiled, turning in his arms to face him fully. "I am a woman who rose from the ashes of her old life. I am a mother who will teach her children that love never hurts, never diminishes, never controls. I am a wife who chooses her husband every day, not out of necessity but out of joy." She leaned forward to kiss him tenderly. "And I am yours, Caleb, now and always, by choice and with a full heart." As the last light faded from the western sky, they remained entwined on the porch swing. Two souls who had found in each other not just safety or comfort, but the rare and precious gift of being truly known and loved. From the darkest moment of Delilah's life had come a beginning neither could have imagined, one built on compassion, strengthened through adversity, and sustained by a love that had transformed them both. In the years that followed, whenever someone asked how they had met, Caleb would simply say that Delilah had arrived in La Junta when she needed a new beginning, and he had been fortunate enough to be the one to give it to her. But Delilah knew the truth was both simpler and more profound. They had saved each other, and in doing so, had created something beautiful from the broken pieces of their past.